Welcome to the Startup to Exit podcast, where we will bring you world-class entrepreneurs and VCs to share their hard-earned success stories and secrets. This podcast has been brought to you by TIE Seattle. TIE is a global nonprofit that focuses on fostering entrepreneurship. TIE Seattle offers a range of programs, including the Go Vertical Startup Creation Weekend, TIE Entrepreneur Institute, and the TIE Seattle Angel Network. We encourage you to become a TIE member so you can gain access to these great programs. To become a member, please visit www.seattle.tie.org.
Welcome back to another episode of our podcast from Startup to Exit. My name is Gauri Shankar. I'm on the board of TIE Seattle, a serial entrepreneur based in Seattle, Washington. My co-host Shirish Natkarni, who's also a board member of TIE, is a serial author, and I'll get to it in a second. But we are very excited to have our next guest on our Generative AI series. He is from the Bay Area, so we'll bring a unique perspective about the Generative AI movement that we are on at the moment. This podcast is brought to you by TIE Seattle, and TIE is a not-for-profit that fosters entrepreneurs all over the globe. Shirish has written 2 books. We borrowed the title of his first book from Startup to Exit, and the second book, A Winner Take All, is also out wherever books are sold. We thank you all for subscribing and supporting us through our 1-year journey that we've been on doing this podcast. And please subscribe, share, and the podcast is available everywhere you can listen to podcasts. And it's also available on YouTube, where you can see it on video also. With that, let me hand it over to Shirish to introduce our guest and get this episode underway. Shirish.
Thank you, Gauri. I'd like to welcome Vivek Ramaswamy to our podcast. Vivek is an investor at Madrona Ventures, which is a premier firm based out of Seattle and now in the Bay Area as well, where Vivek is based. Vivek also writes a really awesome newsletter, which I would recommend highly, called Aspiring for Intelligence. It talks a lot about AI and latest trends in enterprise. So today we'll be, exploring the space of generative AI. Vivek has written a lot about it, so we'd love to tap into his expertise. So welcome, Vivek.
Hey, Shirish and Gauri, thank you so much for having me on. Great to be here.
Great. So let's start with your background. Tell us a little bit about your journey from Goldman Sachs to Madrona Ventures and what led you to join Madrona in the Bay Area.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually not a Bay Area native myself. I'm originally from Canada, from Edmonton, Alberta. And went to university in the East Coast near Toronto before making my way out to San Francisco to work at Goldman Sachs, where I started my career and worked in the tech investment banking group for a couple of years. That was in 2013, and it was a really fun time to be at the bank. And Facebook had just gone public, and there were some really amazing startups and tech companies that were growing and scaling, and I just felt like everywhere around me in San Francisco, people were building startups and products, and I was like, okay, this is really interesting. I'm more of a finance background type of person, but I want to find a way to get involved in these startups and companies. What's the best way to do that? And I started looking at venture capital as a career, and one of the things that I was doing at the time was like I reached out to some people who were a couple of years older than me, or had just left Goldman and were at other venture capital funds. And one of the gentlemen who I was close with, he had just joined Redpoint Ventures, and he was telling me a little bit about it, and he was telling me about VC, and I was like, oh, this sounds really cool. You get to meet really awesome founders and entrepreneurs all day. You get to look at different industries, and you get to look at the tech landscape and see what's changing and try and make investments here and there. I thought that was a really interesting field, and so ended up pursuing that. And I ended up going to work at Redpoint in 2015. on the growth team. So we were, the $400 million growth fund at the time. That's now, that was fund 2 when I joined, and I think they're up to fund 4 or 5. But terrific place. Spent about 5.5 years there. We were mostly investing in Series B, Series C stage investments. In terms of where I was focused, enterprise software companies, cloud infrastructure. We were investors in companies like Snowflake and HashiCorp and SentinelOne and a bunch of other great businesses. Did that for about 5.5 years. Learned a lot, had a really good time, and then I was looking at doing something a little bit different and something a little bit more entrepreneurial for me at the end of 2020. And that's when I linked up with my current partner, Karan Mahendru, who is one of my partners at Madrona. But at the time, he was coming from Trinity Ventures. I was coming from Redpoint. We joined a large hedge fund called Steadfast. They had been looking at launching a venture fund, and we started that and did that for about a year and a half. Made about 13 investments, mostly mid to late stage software companies. And that's when we heard from Madrona, and we had known the Madrona folks for a little while. Obviously, the Tim and Soma and Matt, who you mentioned, were leading the fund and doing a lot of really incredible investments out of Seattle. And they had been thinking about opening up a Bay Area office, starting a team there. And, Karan and I were chatting with them, and they were like, hey, why don't you come join us? And Madrona had just raised 2 new funds. We felt like, hey, we've got an office here. We've got our networks here. And increasingly in the areas that Madrona had, an early lead in AI infrastructure, where we had been investing for the past 10 years, we felt like there was a lot of opportunity in the Bay Area and, really beyond, across the U.S. and the East Coast as well. And so the fit was really good. And so Karan and I joined in late 2022 and been here for the last almost 2 years.
Okay, great. So let's talk about what's happening in the field of generative AI. I'm sure you must have heard and read about Apple's recent announcements, enhancements in with Siri, and integration with ChatGPT, writing tools, summarization tools, image generation, and so forth. What were your thoughts about the announcement? Was that what you were expecting? Any surprises?
I would say in a way, it wasn't incredibly surprising that Apple realized that they need to start talking about AI. I think you had mentioned that I was a writer of this blog, Aspiring for Intelligence. I co-write that with my colleague Sabrina Wu, and Sabrina and I were chatting about what we should talk about I think 2 months ago, and we were saying, hey, Apple is the one giant that everyone would think that they would incorporate AI into their products in some way, but they haven't been as loud about it. Now, at the same time, in a way, they have been incorporating AI, right, in Siri. And Siri was an early iteration of being able to use data and models to act as a personal assistant. But then I think they certainly got lapped by Microsoft for sure, especially through their partnership with OpenAI and Google and all these other giants. And so I think in a way we were all expecting Apple to do something with AI. We weren't exactly sure what it was going to be. And I think they're doing the smartest thing in that the best advantage that Apple has over everyone else today is their distribution, right? The one thing that OpenAI or NVIDIA or even Microsoft does not have is 1 billion plus devices and users worldwide where everyone is buying those products and putting the most amount of their personal detail and information into those products, in iPhones, in MacBooks, in iPads. And what Apple realized is, hey, we have this incredible distribution advantage. We have all of these devices globally. We've got an incredibly committed user base. What's the best way we can incorporate AI into those products and make it useful for everybody else in a way where they may not necessarily have to release a foundation model, and open source it in the way that Google does or Meta does or others do. And so I think they are taking a different tact in the AI game. At the same time, a lot of these demos that they were showing, people are like, well, when is that actually going to be usable? right? Like, what are they doing that I can use today? And I think that's going to be the next question, is all of the really cool things they were showing that Siri can do, that you can do on your iPad, that you can do with Apple Notes. The real question is going to be, when does that actually become generally available, and how are people going to use it? But, partnering with OpenAI, I think was a strong move by them.
Great. So overall, in line with your, generally in line with your expectations. The only question being when the features will be made available.
Yeah, I think the biggest surprise with Apple is, frankly, they weren't talking about AI 12 months ago, or they were this late to the party. And Apple is known for being well ahead of the game, most of the time with consumer devices and things like that. And so, we might say in a year, Apple was waiting until they found the perfect opportunity and they got it right, and then decided to implement it. And so, we were all questioning, when was Apple going to start talking about AI in a meaningful way? And now they finally have. And the next question will be, how does this actually get implemented in its products, and what are people going to think?
Right. Got it. Okay. So the space of LLMs has also been heating up. You have new models from Meta, from Google, and OpenAI has had a new model since their original announcement. So the space is really heating up with a lot of competition. What is your sense for how these new LLMs compare to OpenAI?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that for a while now, for at least the last 6 to 12 months, within Madrona on our Monday partner meetings, we often talk about all of this, right? We're just like, what's happening in the world of AI? Every week changes, every week is different, every couple of days is different. And our view for a while now has been, we're not going to have one single model that is going to rule everything and that's going to be significantly better than everything else. We think the world is moving towards a mix of closed source and open source models. Open source models are getting better all the time, which is great. But right now, it is still GPT that is the best model, right? And there was an article today, I think it was in the information, where there's some recent benchmarking examples showing that GPT-4o is just truly state of the art, and they are significantly better than the competition. And I think what's going to be interesting to see is OpenAI isn't going to go anywhere, right? GPT is going to be, if not the best model, a top 3 model for a very long period of time. And a number of enterprises are going to adopt GPT. But there's a lot of users of models out there, right? And so we easily think there could be 1 or 2 very large proprietary models and companies that are built off of proprietary models, whether that's OpenAI and Anthropic and maybe 1 or 2 more. And then there's going to be a number of folks that use Llama and a number of folks that use Mistral and Mixtral. So I think we're going to see a proliferation of these models. I think for the time being, OpenAI has the lead. And GPT, especially GPT-4o, is just very, very good. And OpenAI has the best mix in terms of an abundance of capital and abundance of talent. And those two things put together is what currently allows them to stay ahead on the model game. I think they know that is not going to last forever. That's not, that's not a perpetual lead. That's a lead that is going to be short to midterm, which is why they're, apparently exploring areas like agents and applications and how far up the stack do they move? Because at some point the models will get more commoditized. Their lead will shorten. Other folks will get better. And then the question is, what do you do with those models, right? What is the way that enterprises actually make use of those models, or consumers make use of those models? And I think that's going to be the next big paradigm shift, is going from racing to saying who has the best model, to then it's, okay, 3 to 5 models all look pretty comparatively similar. They're all roughly the same price and performance, or around there. There's some small deltas here and there. Then it's the question is, what do you do with those models once you have it?
Right. Now, do you think that, one of the ways that OpenAI has been able to create a really good model is they have, from what I've heard, is that they've literally scraped the web to train the model. But now you have lawsuits from likes of New York Times, etc., and they're paying for licensing Reddit and so forth. So, and there's also, we spoke to the Transparency Coalition. It's a nonprofit that is pushing for, information to be disclosed as to where you're getting your data and so forth. So, as more and more data has to be paid for or is not available, what do you see happening to the quality of these models?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely a question that's still open right now, and that all these model players are figuring out who actually owns the data, right? Reddit's a great example, right? Of Reddit has a licensing deal where Reddit is getting paid by OpenAI for the data that they provide. At the end of the day, if you look at Reddit, and if you scroll through Reddit, as I often do on a daily basis, you will see how many posts there are from users saying, wait a second, Reddit doesn't actually deserve that money. The users deserve that money, because Reddit is all user-generated data, or mostly user-generated data. So some of these users are saying, wait a second, if my data is being used for the model and for the model purposes, but Reddit, the platform, is getting paid, then that system feels broken to me. Yeah. And do I continue posting on Reddit? Do I go somewhere else? I think the same thing you're going to see happen with the New York Times, with user comments on the New York Times, with other publications where there's user-generated content. So I think there's a whole new question of who is actually responsible for the data that's going into the model, and who should get compensated for it? Who should be right? What does rightful compensation look like? I think these are all open questions that are being figured out. And in that time period, that hasn't stopped any of the models from trying to go in and collect the most amount of data that they can to train the model, right? Because once you're done with training the data that's on the corpus of the internet, then you go into enterprises, right? You go into figuring out every enterprise. I think Jensen at NVIDIA said this on a recent podcast or speech, where he said every enterprise is sitting on a gold mine, because they have proprietary data that's not available on the internet, or that's not available to anyone else but that enterprise. So how do you make that enterprise data the most used and the most usable, and you can actually leverage in a high quality, highly valuable way? So going back to your original question of how do I think this is all going to play out? I think that expenses will probably go up, right? I mean, all these model players, if they're going to have to pay for it, but they're making so much money hand over fist that it's going to be a drop in the bucket for them in terms of what they're going to pay for. I think the bigger debate is going to be who deserves to get paid. And then for each of the enterprises who may not care about, the enterprises don't care necessarily about getting paid for data. They want to say, how do we use our data to make our product better, right? They're not going to strike an agreement or a license agreement with OpenAI. There's going to be some other fashion in which they use these models so that they can make their products better and eventually, hopefully, help their end customers as well. So to sum it all up, I think data is going to continues to be the lifeblood of models, and high quality data, not just quantity of data, but high quality data is going to matter the most. So would you pay as much for maybe the 14th page on some random, chat group about automotive? Do you want data from that? Or is the quality data that's, sitting inside of Kellogg's way more valuable to you? Probably that.
Yeah. So speaking of enterprise data, I spoke recently to some Google researchers, and what they're trying to do is actually use small language models and train them on enterprise data, as opposed to taking a large language model like OpenAI and training that on enterprise data, because the cost is going to be a lot less in terms of training that model, as opposed to trying to use OpenAI for that. What are your thoughts on using small language models versus large language models for enterprise data?
I think that's a growing trend for sure. I think that as far as we've seen today, the models that capture the most amount of attention are still the large language models.
Mm-hmm.
But small models are going to get better. And I think the other thing is small models that are suited to the task that enterprise or that use case is trying to achieve. That's going to be where that makes the most amount of sense. And we did a podcast recently with this company Predabase, which is helping fine tune open source models. And the founder Dev had a great line talking about, some folks don't need a model. They need a model that solves a specific task that they are really curious about. They don't need the model to write a sonnet for them or write a classical piece of music, right? It's like, that is not necessary. There's a bunch of this stuff that is not necessary for the specific task that I'm trying to create. And so that might be related to usage-based pricing, right? A very specific model that's good at usage-based pricing. It could be a vertical model related to construction software, right? It's just taking construction data and getting very, very good at that specific task. I think what we're also trying to figure out is how much does the model need to have generalized information in order to get really good at something specialized? Do you have to be trained on a general amount of data first? Think about it like humans, right? We go to kindergarten, we go to grade 1 through 12 where we're learning all the subjects. Then we specialize in college or university, and then we specialize even more at our job. So does a model need to look like that? Start general and then get very specific? Or are we going to get to a point where you can have a spun off model that's just specific to construction or just specific to music or something else?
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Got it. One last question before I hand it over to Gauri. You've written that open source models will, by the end of this year, will be fairly close in terms of performance compared to closed source models like OpenAI. Did I capture that correctly? Is that still do you still feel that way?
I think what we may have written at the time is that open source models are definitely going to catch up. I think that the open question is, how long will that take? And I think that OpenAI continues to churn out incredible models, right? 4.0 is great. And, you, like I mentioned earlier, that is state of the art. And so whether it's at the end of this year or sometime next year, it's hard for me to give an exact date, but it's going to happen that open source models get just as good as closed source models. I think we can safely say that over time, models are going to get much closer. They're going to get more commoditized. And at some point in a few years, we're not going to think about, hey, do I use this model for this, because it's significantly better than the other. Generally, it might be better for a specific purpose. So I do think that open source models are getting much better, whether it's Llama or Mistral or Gemini or others are getting very, very good. And, I could see in the not too distant future that they'll catch up to the proprietary models that we're seeing today.
Got it. Cool. Over to you, Gauri.
Oh, great. Hey, thanks, Shirish. Vivek, you're from Edmonton. I'm sure you're partial to your Oilers. They're trying to make a comeback. So that's kind of feel good. Now, you talked about Apple entering the AI. Is it more a comeback story? Siri was also ran. Now, they were the first AI, right? In some ways that how we were introduced to. Are they being careful, cautious that they don't want to make a Siri mistake, or did they miss a turn and so they had to go with the OpenAI as opposed to building an LLM on their own? For once we heard rumors they're building a car. They could have been building an LLM. So, so what is this a wait and watch by Apple, you think?
It could be. And I don't have any proprietary knowledge there, but I would say that it's very hard to underestimate a close to $3 trillion company, right? I think that often, and myself included, we make the mistake of thinking Apple is like a startup, right? Where it's like, hey, these startups are moving really fast. How come Apple is not keeping up? And it's like, oh, wait, we forget that's a company that churns out, it's a $3 trillion market cap, billions of revenue, hundreds of millions of cash. We just are, I think we often make that mistake of saying, how come Apple's not moving quickly? I think people often viewed Apple as the leading edge of innovation, right? With iPhone and with Mac and with everything that they came out with. And I think what's happening is that they found some products that worked really, really well with them, well for them, and their install base is really big. And they probably weren't thinking about AI in the current iteration of how we think about AI as much. As you said, they were early with Siri, right? They had Siri for a long time. That was probably the first real personal assistant. And then when we saw ChatGPT and others come out, we're like, hey, how come we don't have that on my phone? That's the first thing. How come that's not running locally, right? Like, how do I get that to run on my device? And how can I get that incorporated all my tools? We can't underestimate Apple. At the end of the day, they're a giant company with a lot of resources and a lot of really smart people. And as you said, like, they had the self-driving car, they decided to axe it. Okay, AI is a thing. They'd probably let AI bake for a couple years, saw what's working, saw what's not, and then decided, okay, maybe now's the time that we enter into it. And I, my personal opinion is, I don't think Apple really cares what people think about whether it's the leading edge of innovation anymore. They care about what works.
Yep.
Right. They're a mature company. They have a lot of devices out there. They've got a reputation to keep in mind. They've got trust that they need to engender and maintain. And they can't just roll out a product and say, oh, sorry, it didn't work. That's just not how it works anymore, is my sense at Apple. It's good. If it's going to go out publicly, it's going to be like, it works and people like it, and then we'll get it out there. So you're right. I'm often in the trap of like, how come Apple's not moving as quickly? And I was like, oh, they're bigger than most startups that we look at.
Let me shift to the enterprise space that you talked about, right? So enterprises are going to absorb AI. They're all going through their own stages of watching, learning, and incorporating. So obviously the agents have become such a important nexus within the enterprise of discussion, because they have all this data. The agents can do it. Where do you see enterprises really, navigating towards as the entry point into AI? The obvious ones like customer care, those things we hear about a lot, because those are still, I feel, on the edges or the periphery of the enterprise. They're cost saving, but they're not yet clearly changing the direction of their own destiny. Where do you see, from your vantage of an investor, startups going after and saying, hey, enterprise, here are agents that can change the trajectory of your commerce, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a good question. As you say, the first few areas within we're seeing enterprises actually saying, hey, let's roll out AI, is some things like customer service, CX, back office products and tools, right? Legal, operations, finance. Like, I think those are really areas that we're going to see a lot of AI happen, and it's already happening quickly. The thing that I'm most interested in, and that we're most interested in, collectively, is thinking about, okay, how do enterprises take AI and transform their products and revenue to do things that are completely different from what they were doing before? It's not just about making things a little faster and a little cheaper, but completely different in terms of the products and services that they provide their end customers. And I'm thinking about this in the sense that the number one thing enterprises have in terms of what they're going to do better than, in terms of the advantage that they have over other companies, is the data that they have. I keep going back to this data piece, because what they're going to find is some of the data that JP Morgan has been sitting on, the petabytes of data that they've been sitting on for a long time, they're suddenly going to be able to transform the way that they underwrite insurance, or the way they underwrite new customers, the way they enter new markets. We're going to see that with small companies and big companies. And so that's going to take time, because you can't just use your enterprise or customer data in any form or fashion. And I think the other thing is, often people are willing to take a bet on saying, hey, can we make my legal department a little bit better? Can we make my finance department a little bit better? My CX department a little bit better? But the minute you touch end customers, your own customers, especially new prospects, and the customers that make up your top 20% of revenue, and how do I transform the relationships that I have with them, or that we as an enterprise have with them? that's where I think that there's going to be really interesting ways of using AI. And you mentioned agents. Agents is a space we've been thinking a lot about and spending time in, and we're looking at agent infrastructure companies, that are doing really cool things at using the web browser. We're looking at AI agents that are trying to, complete tasks and automate tasks. I think this is where enterprise is going to be really interesting, right? If ServiceNow can augment their own products with AI agents, does that mean that the person who is actually the IT admin using ServiceNow doesn't actually have to do that anymore? And you have an agent running it in its place? Or think about the person who's like managing a Salesforce instance or at a big company. Now, if they have an agent that does that and Salesforce provides you the agent, the nature of which Salesforce is selling you a product looks very different, right? Yep. They're no longer selling you the workflow software. They're selling you the end outcome. They're selling you almost a person or a business function that does this. And so that's what I'm most interested in, is like, how do you automate the actual work itself as opposed to just providing the workflow?
Let's shift then to this thesis on companies you look at, right? As an investor today, you look at the AI stack. I mean, for the sake of this discussion, let's just say NVIDIA is at the foundation of everything. So we fork up a lot of money to them. I recently read somewhere that they create in Australia every couple of months in their total market value. But in the AI stack, there's a few at the foundation layer. The large players, Microsoft, Google, Meta, etc. And then the startups are all depending on that foundation. As an investor, where would you say startups are congregating? Where do you see open white spaces? And where are a lot of Me Too's that someday OpenAI will just flip a switch and you wiped out? How do you evaluate it?
That last question is something that every investor has been thinking about for the last 24 months, is what happens. The question used to be, what if Google does this? Right. Yeah. And then now the question is, what happens if OpenAI does this? And you're right. The way we think about it is there's the stack, right? There's the NVIDIA, which is making money from everybody. And then you have the foundation models. That's the OpenAI and Anthropics and Cohere's of the world. Then you have an infrastructure middleware stack, which is developer tooling. How do I make the best use of these models? And then on top of that, you have the application layer. We have not, as a fund at Madrona, we have not participated in the model layer, in the foundation model layer. And, there's some reasons for that, but we think that, the kind of capital that's being consumed by those types of companies right now is different from, the kind of capital we like to see companies consume and pull out. And then, but we have been active at both the infrastructure and the application layer. So at the infrastructure, stack, where investors in companies like Unstructured and Octo AI and DeepGram, these are all companies that are saying, hey, how do we take how do we help enterprises, companies, consumers make the best possible use of these models, whether that's pre-processing data or making your data actually more usable, or creating new speech to AI and speech to text and text to speech models, things like that. We've been pretty active at the infrastructure layer, and that's honestly where we've seen a lot of activity over the last couple of years. Because I think when any new tech paradigm shift happens, the first thing you see is a lot of developers that start to experiment with it, right? And developers trying to figure out what are the best tools we need to make use of those models. So that stack is pretty interesting. But I think where the most amount of value we're going to see over the next 10 plus years is coming from the application side, right? And that's the end user applications, whether that's business to business applications or business to consumer applications. But the actual apps that users are using, I think we're not even scratching the surface of what's possible in that area. Right now, we're seeing a lot of, I don't like the term, and we've written about this. We don't love the term GPT wrapper, because that actually takes away from what a lot of these companies do, which is UI matters. The way you actually present this data, the way you structure this data, there's a lot that goes into it. But I think right now we're seeing kind of this V1 of, okay, hey, there's a model, you have a current task. How do we use the model to make the task better? And I think there are going to be some pretty interesting companies that come out of that. I think there's applications we haven't even thought of yet, or we don't even know what the possibility is when the models get really, really good and when all the developer tooling is there. So just in the sense that if we look at the last cloud wave and we saw the hyperscalers, a few of which got really, really big and did really well. You had a number of developer tools that did really well, the Twilios and, the Herokus of the world. And then you've got way more applications, 10x plus applications, right? Everything ranging from Salesforce to Netflix to ServiceNow to Workday, all of that in every function. I think the same thing is going to happen with AI, where we're going to have some really good infrastructure companies, some great middleware tooling, because that's going to be necessary. But then the app market will be 10 to 100x bigger. And so we're seeing more and more companies that are now starting to build on the app side, vertical apps, horizontal apps. And the thing that we always have to keep in mind is, okay, what not only what happens if OpenAI might do this, and there's always a might. OpenAI has 100 different things that they have to do, but also the incumbents, right? You have Microsoft and and obviously Google and Apple that are building AI into their own products. You also have winners of the last generation like Canva that are doing really, really amazing things with AI. And so it's not like you're just creating new white space where you're just going to go ahead and create a product on its own. That product has to stand its own against the incumbents and against some of these other folks. So I think that's really important. The other layer that we're really, I would call it a layer, but it's really almost like it's perpendicular in a way because it's across all of these, is security, right? There is new security vulnerabilities, new security paradigms that we're starting to see open up, whether that's things like non-human identities or deep fakes or AI-powered security analysts. There's a whole new generation of security companies that we believe are going to be birthed in this current era. And so that is not going to go away. Security threats are not going to go away. And so we're very much focused on those as well. But yeah, for us at Madrona, as day one for the long run investors, we're investing from the seed formation stage companies to Series B, Series C, and beyond. Those are the areas that we're most focused on.
Got it. It's fantastic that you mentioned that the incumbents are not just going to roll over and say, "Oh yeah, all business startups use us." The incumbents, such as Snowflake, Salesforce, ServiceNow, things, and others you mentioned, are also going to tool their platform with AI capabilities that the enterprises can already use, and the developers have to come in with them, around them, or integrate with them, right? So when you look at startups at this point, they're all grabbing whatever is available, but eventually some of it will sort of become narrow alleys for startups to really come through. But security seems like what you just mentioned seems like quite wide open because the vulnerabilities are unclear to all of us at this point. It could be anything. We really don't know where it's coming from, and you could go after that. So maybe you can expand on that. Would that not be the hyperscalers' focus, responsibility, or to the extent theirs to lose, quote unquote, because they know it all, right? And in some regards.
It's funny is I was having a conversation with with a founder about this a little while ago, a security founder, and he's like, what the funny thing is, security is top 3 budget item and has been for CIOs for many years. Mm-hmm. We have billions of dollars every year that's being spent in R&D by Palo Alto Networks and Zscaler and all these companies. You have even more billions that are being poured in the space, and yet we still have hacks every week. So security is one of those things. It's just not solved, right? It's just not solved. And we're seeing, again, new attacks, new paradigms, new vectors all the time happen. So to your point about hyperscalers, I think they will protect their environments as much as they can, but there's always going to be holes. That's why in cloud security, even though Amazon and Google have products, you have a company like Wiz that's just done incredibly well and has become sort of, almost just like the go-to cloud resource that cloud security resource that CISOs are going to go towards. So I think that no matter how much cloud security you have with it from the hyperscalers, each application is going to have their own security. Snowflake had their own security. They had a vulnerability. Everyone is going to try and secure their own app and environment as much as possible. but that's not enough. There's going to be gaps, there's going to be vulnerabilities, there's going to be holes, and that means you need third-party tools. And so then the question is, okay, once I've got my Palo Alto and I've got my Zscaler and I've got my Wiz, what else do I need and what else do I need to use? The reason I said that we're interested in the space is there's always new security companies being built and scaled, because as you say, there's always new problems, right? The problem of deepfakes, for example, is something we think about a lot. And one of our venture partners, Oren Etzioni, has been very involved in the space up in Seattle, as you know. But that's a new problem that isn't solved at all. And we're just starting to see the issues that come with identity fraud related to deepfakes. I believe there's going to be a new business that is created to solve that problem, right? Same thing with non-human identities. When AI agents proliferate, there's going to be 10 to 100x more machines and agents inside of an organization sharing passwords and keys and things like that that are not humans or tied to a human identity. I think there's probably going to be a new company that's being built on that. So, I think that as much security as all of the incumbents say they implement in their own products, it's not enough. And every enterprise is going to have to think about what else they need to protect their own environments.
Right. Especially, my sort of thinking is that there'll be a ton of AI deployed for drug discovery, really things that save humanity, right? I mean, if big pharma or small pharma wants to deploy AI-based models to get their discovery better, it's probably faster than ever before. So that changes the way we look at things like identity, because who is calling on who to solve a problem in the drug discovery sequence that can, I don't know, cure cancer one day, right? That kind of a thing. You're exactly right on these deep fakes or security in general, may be the tip of the spear that goes after where the enterprises have to deploy a lot more. Shifting a little bit, right? So obviously you're seeing there are two sides, right? There's those who are running scared that a ton of jobs will be taken away. Those who are saying more jobs will be created. You're in the business of creation. I mean, you guys wake up, invest so that you create. You create products that leads to jobs and that leads to prosperity. Has the mindset of startup founders changed in the way they approach this problem now, as saying, hey, I can eliminate this or make it that, or are they still deeply connected to how they solve the problem? What is it that you're seeing day to day as an investor from a startup mindset?
It's a great question. I think it's more of the latter, and I would say that certainly we are there to support the creators as investors, and certainly can't take credit for what our founders do. But I think that right now we are seeing more. Let me rephrase. I think right now there's been talk about, hey, you can go create a company now, or you can create a business and you only need 2 people and you don't need 100 people and you don't need to take venture funding and all that. I think that's going to happen, right? I think there will be smaller companies that can be quite valuable using AI. But in this current period, venture funding is going up, not down, right? Yep. Number of new startups is going up, not down. And the capital being consumed is going up, not down. And I think a big reason for that is because we're still in the part of the cycle where creation is happening and things haven't been completely figured out. You still need great talent, right? To build a really good company. A lot of the things that we look at when we meet a Series A founder or seed founder, Series B founder, a lot of the questions we ask are still the same questions we asked in the pre-AI era, right? Like, who are you hiring? What customers are you going after? Where are people finding value from what you're doing? And yes, over time, I think that we'll get to a point where you need less people to create, to make $100 million business. You may need a lot less people than you did before, right? Yep. Even to create a $10 million or $1 million business, you need less investment because there's more tools available to you. There's more products available to you. You might have agents doing a lot of this work. I think a lot of that is going to happen. I think just in this, that's more of a 3 to 5 years out, as opposed to the next 6 to 12 months, where I see the number of pitch meetings we have. I mean, we're meeting tons of founders. It's really fun, actually. It's a great time because we had a bit of a lull, when, let's say, at the end of the cloud era, before this current AI era, where you might have seen a lot of these Me Too companies, and it was the 12th, version of a marketing SaaS company or something like that. And now you have like real innovation happening, that all these founders and really, really talented entrepreneurs are trying to build new businesses, and they still need great talent. They still need capital to do it. But do I think in the next 5 to 10 years plus, we're going to see many more companies that don't take any venture dollars and that are 5 people and a few tools, or 1 person and a bunch of tools, and they're doing what it used to take 50 to 100 people to do? Absolutely. I think we are heading that way. And I think we're probably heading to a future where we're going to have more founders and more entrepreneurs, not less, right? Whereas maybe an entrepreneur in a previous era needed to have a network, they needed to know people, they need to have a certain background, they need to be able to raise money. That's not going to be necessary when you can have AI agents running around doing a lot of this work, or a lot of this work has been automated by some other product. So I think that's sort of the future state that I can see happen, and I think it's going to be really exciting.
So, it's a unique moment in time where, quote unquote, corporate venture funding is at an all time high, whether it be Microsoft investing in OpenAI. Let's just take that as the biggest venture investment they've made, right? As a bet, so to speak, even though they couch it differently. But and that's not going to stop it just with Microsoft. Obviously, Amazon's made an Anthropic, and so on and so forth. Everybody is going to make a lot of investments. As a venture fund, is that a new thing? Do you guys see it as like, because they are essentially investing their balance sheet as opposed to how you operate, which is to an LP, your answer to an LP base? Mm-hmm. Is there a lot of discussions that corporates are coming to you and saying, hey, what are you guys doing? Or is there a mindset different? Because they've never been leaders like they are at the state they're at the moment we are seeing right now.
Yeah, you're right. And we've co-invested and co-led investments with a number of them. Salesforce Ventures, NVIDIA Ventures, Databricks Ventures, and often each of these CVCs or each of these organizations have a venture arm, and then they have a corp dev arm, right? So they may even operate separately, where the venture arm makes certain kind of investments, corp dev maybe makes more strategic and bigger investments. You're right. At the end of the day, for us, we have LPs that are 2 constituents that matter the most for VCs and for obviously for Madrona are the founders that we work with and invest in, and the LPs that invest in us. And so I think in one of the ways that a lot of the CVC money has shifted the landscape a little bit is that often some of these CVCs, especially if they're more from a strategic perspective, they don't have to care so much about financial return, right? Because they're just like, we want to invest in something that we think we'll be great partners with, or we want to help propagate them. We want to partner with them. Maybe we'll think about acquiring them at some point, but we want to be involved at any level. And so then if that creates the round and that creates a certain price of the round, then we have to look at our models and say, hey, do we think we can get a financial return at this price that we would if we were leading the investment at the round size that we would like? Right. So I think that's probably the biggest way that we've seen things shift is like, hey, suddenly you have NVIDIA and Databricks and Snowflake and, all these folks putting money in, and that's great. I think that's healthy for the ecosystem, great for founders. But then we have to think about, does that mean the round construct is different from what we would have liked to see or what we have seen? Some cases we have co-invested with them. Some cases we've decided to pass on these rounds. And again, we have to make sure that there's a viable, sort of visibility to a great return for us and our LPs. But it's certainly interesting. I had never seen in the 8 or 9 years that I've been doing this, I've never seen the amount of capital being invested from the corporate VCs that I have today. And like you said, they never used to lead rounds, right? It used to be, we don't want this corporate venture to lead our round because then they have more rights, they have more information rights, maybe they'll try and acquire us and all this. But at this point, I've seen them play very fairly. And I think that they're just, in many ways, they can see the future almost more clearly than many of the venture capital funds because they're seeing what's happening inside of their own organizations, and that's getting them excited.
That's a bit of an advantage, I guess they have, that they can, and if they invest, that means you can be sure they have seen something that they want to come and invest. One last question from me. We kicked off this generative AI series in January with 4 investors making a prediction. So we're not going to let you off the hook without you making a prediction for us. One of them came from Tim Porter. Just no pressure, by the way. So what would be your prediction for the 12-month prediction that is likely that we will record and then come back to you in 12 months and say, Vivek, this is what happened. So what's your prediction, Vivek?
That's a great question. I should have went and listened to Tim's prediction again, and then I'll record that. I would say I think going back to one of the things we were talking about with open source models, I think 12 months from now we'll be at a place where open source models will be just as good as GPT-4o and just as good as the proprietary models, to the point where maybe on the leaderboard there's a little bit of a difference in, and you might see that there's some delta, but the difference will be very negligible. And I think that's just going to open up the possibility of the kind of applications and the kind of companies that are being created. And I can see at the rate of progress that we see on the open source side, I think in 12 months we'll be at a state of maybe not exact parity, but close to parity. So that's how I left myself off the hook. So we won't give you exacts to say it's right there, but very close.
But we're going to hold you to it. We'll come back. I agree. I agree that is the most likely thing to happen. Also, open source models will prevail and will get better. I agree with you completely. And I think we're only going to hold you to the 12 months. So there you go. Shirish, back to you to close it out.
Yeah, great. So thank you so much, Vivek. This was a fascinating conversation. Look forward to reading more of your Aspiring for Intelligence newsletter. Again, I would highly recommend that to our readers. It's on Substack. And look forward to talking to you again in a year's time to see how your predictions turned out.
Great. Thank you so much, Shirish and Gauri. Really appreciate it. And yes, we'll chat in 12 months and see what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast from Startup to Exit, brought to you by TIE Seattle. Assisting in production today are Isha Jain and Mini Verma. Please subscribe to our podcast and rate our podcast wherever you listen to them. Hope you enjoyed it.